volume's okay. So thank you for being here. So that first tune we performed is a Fats Waller song that was performed by Louis Armstrong famously, called Black and Blue. And that's the only cover tune we're going to do tonight. So most of the compositions we're playing are originals. So this song is referenced very early on in the novel we're talking about today, Invisible Man. And I'd like to read the passage because it's a very important setup of the story and some of the themes. So very early on in the book, Ellison writes, his main character says, "I'd like to hear 5 recordings of Louis Armstrong playing and singing What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue, all at the same time." And I like that 5 recordings and all at the same time. There's a lot of multiplicity themes in the novel. And sometimes now I listen to Louis while I have my favorite dessert, a vanilla ice cream and slow gin. The bitter and the sweet, which is something that's throughout the story, right? This is a tragicomic story. There's the bitter and the sweet all kind of mixed together as a theme in the story. I pour the red liquid over the white mound, watching it glisten in the vapor rising as Louis bends that military instrument, Terry plays, into a beam of lyrical sound. This act of transformation, taking a military instrument, the instrument of war, and turning it into something beautiful and profound. Perhaps I like Louis Armstrong because he's made poetry out of being invisible. I think it must be because he's unaware that he is invisible. And my own grasp of invisibility aids me to understand his music. Once when I asked for a cigarette, some jokers gave me a reefer, which I lighted when I got home and sat listening to my phonograph. It was a strange evening. Invisibility, let me explain, gives one a slightly different sense of time. You're never quite on the beat. Sometimes you're ahead and sometimes behind. And this is a beautiful description of jazz and how jazz works when you have sort of syncopation and you're playing with time in the music, right? So instead of the swift and imperceptible flowing of time, you are aware of its nodes, those points where time stands still, from which it leaps ahead, and you slip into the breaks and you look around. That's what you hear vaguely in Louis' music. And that idea of slipping into the breaks and looking around is thematically important in the novel Invisible Man, because the narrator has basically retreated from society, right? You see him in the beginning of the story, and he's in this underground basement lair of sorts, right, where he's listening to this music. And he's done that, right? He's retreated, he's seeking refuge, he's making himself literally invisible so that he can look around, reflect, observe what's happened in his life, and figure things out. So that song, What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue, has lyrics. Fats Waller's original lyrics. So I'll read them. It's like a poem. And you can see how thematically, if you read the book, or if you're going to read the book, you'll see how it relates to some of the themes. So, cold empty bed, spring's hard as lead, feels like old Ned, wish I was dead. All my life through, I've been so black and blue. This feeling of solitude and obviously the pun there, right? To feel bruised and beat up, but also feel blue and sad and beat up because of one's race. Even the mouse ran from my house. They laugh at you and scorn you too. What did I do to be so black and blue? There's this gothic quality and almost a humor that's present even in this tragic sort of poem, which you read in the book as well. I'm white inside, but that don't help my case, because I can't hide what is in my face. How would it end? Ain't got a friend. My only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue? So there's this internal and external play that's happening in that poem, but also in the narrator's story, right? He's seeing himself as a reflection of the society around him, right? Or is perceived that way. So we have this internal and external motif happening throughout the poem and also throughout the story, Invisible Man. So what brought me to write Suite of Music based on this novel? Albany Public Library a couple years ago sort of challenged musicians to write music based on their favorite novels. And I chose Invisible Man. That is my favorite novel of all time. And I was inspired by it and really was able to write music that would never have been written had I not been given this assignment to pattern it off some themes in this story. So Invisible Man, just a little background. Novel by Ralph Ellison, written in 1952, won the National Book Award in 1953. And it really examines this unnamed narrator, the Invisible Man, his struggle with racism and identity. And we come to understand that his race really only through inference, right? He's never described his race or his background. It's only through the sort of signifiers around him, the sort of references around him, and those references we're able to pick up culturally and historically from reading his story and understanding the history. And we see his classic journey from the rural South to the industrial North. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit in some of the chapters we're going to be discussing. And the novel is very musical, right? It has a theme and variation approach, and it's the language of jazz, essentially. So that's one reason why it really translated well to music. So couldn't do this without my bandmates, so I want to introduce them. We're the Arch Stanton Quartet. We have Terry Gordon on trumpet, Jim Ketterer on drums, Mr. Chris Macchia on bass. And I think we'll get to our first composition, original composition based on the story. So this composition brings you to the narrator in his underground. As I said, he's in this underground basement area where we meet him in the first part of the novel. It's called the Prologue. And here he establishes the meaning of invisibility, sort of the definition of it. And as he defines it, it's sort of this projection of people's attitudes and their prejudices upon him, right? He's not literally invisible, he's not really a blank slate, but he's kind of an accumulation of what other people perceive him to be. And that's that multiplicity theme I was talking about. So this is the first passage from the book. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows, that carnivalistic type imagery that you see throughout the story. It is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. So for this first tune called Prologue, what I've attempted to do is take that passage, the actual words, and put them to music. So hopefully you can hear a little bit of the cadence and the actual words themselves in this melody, this sort of tangled melody. And I think it relates to what Ellison was talking about when he said the swift, imperceptible nodes, right? Things kind of start and stop, and there's these little breaks and this tangled melody. So try to play with that a little bit musically. So this is the first tune we're going to do. It's called Prologue, the first original tune. One, two, one, two, three, go. Prologue. Hopefully you heard a little bit of that. Invisible man. So like the lyrics in there, fitting the melody. So as the next piece we're going to do, I'll set this up. This is chapter 1 from the novel. I'll do a quick reading. Here the Invisible Man is recounting his youth. He's remembering his time in high school. He's a new high school graduate. And he's been invited to give a speech at this club in the South. It's an all-white club where he's going to receive this scholarship. But before giving his speech, he's asked, or essentially told, to participate in this degrading ritual, this boxing match with other boys from his high school. And the sort of message of this is in this society, in order to give his speech, right at the end, to get the scholarship, you have to go through this ritual. There's a limit on his speech, right? There's contingencies, there's, right? So he's having to sort of take this path, right? And so we see the first variation of the novel's theme of invisibility. And as he's giving his speech, he's using these phrases that are acceptable to his audience, right? He uses the phrase social responsibility, which means basically doing what you're told. You're going to be socially responsible. But all the while bottled up inside of him is this word social equality. And at one point in his speech, he's being like taunted by his audience, right? He's so frustrated by it that he just blurts out social equality by accident, right? Not the phrase that is acceptable to his audience. And you see his interior self emerge, bubble up to the surface, right? He's emerging from his invisibility, his internal self coming into the front. And so after he speaks his mind and says that word, he's immediately shut down and reverts back to saying the acceptable words and phrases. So I'll just do this quick reading, and then we'll do the next piece that is kind of a tone poem. Basically, I took the themes of this passage and kind of put it to music, and you can kind of hear how the action and activities are being performed in the music. So here he is giving his speech. He says, "I spoke automatically and with such fervor that I did not realize that the men were still talking and laughing until my dry mouth, filling up with the blood from my cut, almost strangled me. I coughed, wanting to stop and go to one of the tall brass sand-filled spittoons to relieve myself. But a few of the men, especially the superintendent, were listening, and I was afraid. So I gulped it down, blood, saliva, and all, and continued. What powers of endurance I had during those days. What enthusiasm, what a belief in the rightness of things. Very naive, right? He's recognizing that he was naive. I spoke even louder in spite of the pain, but still they talked and still they laughed as though deaf with cotton and dirty ears. So I spoke with greater emotional emphasis. I closed my ears and swallowed blood until I was nauseated. The speech seemed 100 times as long as before, but I could not leave out a single word. All had to be said, each memorized, nuanced, considered, rendered. So he's like a machine, right? He's giving a machine a scripted speech, and he's doing this internal policing of himself. I have to follow the script exactly. Nor was that all. Whenever I uttered a word of 3 or more syllables, a group of voices would yell for me to repeat it. I used the phrase social responsibility, and they yelled, "What's that word you say?" Social responsibility, I said. What? Social. Louder. Responsibility. More. Respond. Repeat. Civility. He had just gotten out of the boxing ring. Now he's like verbally sparring, right, with his audience. He was actually sparring in the ring. Now it's like a verbal, rhetorical fight. The room filled with uproar and laughter until, no doubt, distracted by having to gulp down my blood, I made a mistake and yelled a phrase I had often seen denounced in newspaper editorials, heard debated in private. Social what? They yelled. Equality! The laughter hummed smoke-like in the sudden stillness. I opened my eyes, puzzled. Sounds of displeasure filled the room. The MC rushed forward. They shouted hostile phrases at me, but I did not understand. A small, dry, mustached man in the front row blurted out, "Say that slowly, son." "What, sir?" "What you just said." "Social responsibility, sir," he said. "You weren't being smart, were you, boy?" he said, not unkindly. "No, sir. You sure that about equality? That was a mistake, right?" Oh, yes, sir. I was swallowing blood." "Well, you had better speak more slowly so we can understand. We mean to do right by you, but you've got to know your place at all times. All right, now, go along with your speech." I was afraid. I wanted to leave, but I wanted also to speak, and I was afraid they'd snatch me down. "Thank you, sir," I said, beginning where I had left off, and having them ignore me as before. So this next piece is based on that passage. It's called Atalanta, and it starts off in this mysterious 3/4 kind of waltz as the invisible man is entering this club, right? Very tentatively, very mysteriously. It stops abruptly, and then the drums do this. It's sort of a military kind of drum beat setting up the boxing match. There's going to be cymbals crashes, and Terry and I are going to be doing some shrieking notes on the guitar and trumpet, kind of emulating that battle royale scene in the boxing match. And then Terry and I go back and forth with a couple of melodies, social responsibility and social equality. Those 2 lines, they're almost constructed the same, right? They have almost the same number of syllables, they have the social in it, right? So they kind of blend together, and they melodically can be fairly close. So I do the line that's social responsibility, which is social responsibility, and Terry will do social equality. And then you'll eventually hear them merge, right? So that's kind of reflecting what's happening in this story. So this piece, and hopefully you can kind of feel it and hear it, the mood of that passage reflected in the music on this tune called Atalanta. Guys ready? 1, 2, 3, here we go. Social equality and social responsibility together, because that's the conflict in the Invisible Man's mind in the beginning of the book, but he eventually reconciles it at the end. He redefines what social responsibility means. It doesn't mean to accommodate to people. It means to, right, you can agitate for your rights but also be socially responsible. So he ends up reconciling those two things, and that's why it was kind of important to kind of combine those melodies to reflect that sort of pattern that happens later in the novel. So for our last piece, this is chapter 10 of the novel, where the Invisible Man is employed at a paint factory, and again he learns this lesson about invisibility in this paint factory where he's working, and he's seeing this literal whitewashing of achievements, black achievements, this time in the symbolism of paint. So the narrator is told to squeeze these black droplets of paint to a bucket of white paint, and no matter how gray it looks to his eyes as he's sort of stirring it, the factory foreman is saying, well, just gleaming white, right? And continues to reinforce this. And so the name of the factory where he works is called Liberty Paints, and I like this idea of paints as a verb and a noun, right? It's the paint itself, but it kind of paints over things. It whitewashes over things. And so in this case, liberty has one aspect of it is denying liberty to others, right? In essence, the symbolism of the chapter. And as we discover, this company, Liberty Paints, is a government contractor, so it kind of adds to the theme of what it means to be living in America at this time. And the paint is used on monuments in Washington. And again, those are physical, right, manifestations of history and how history is defined. And so it literally is that sort of structural representation of this painting over that is in the chapter. So I'll read the passage. So here he is, the Invisible Man is at the paint factory, and he's talking to the foreman, who says, his name's Kimbrough, the foreman. Now get this straight, Kimbrough said gruffly. This is a busy department, and I don't have time to repeat things. You have to follow instructions, and you're going to be doing things you don't understand. So get your orders the first time and get them right. I won't have time to stop and explain everything. You have to catch on by doing exactly what I tell you. You got that? got to follow the script again, right? I nodded, noting that his voice became louder when the men across the floor stopped to listen, right? Whenever this ritual humiliation is always kind of a performance, and sort of reflects back, harkens back to the boxing match where Invisible Man is being ridiculed and humiliated, and there's always an audience that has to be a part of humiliation. All right, he said, picking up several tools. Now come over here. I watched him kneel and open one of the buckets, stirring a milky brown substance. A nauseating stench arose. I wanted to step away, but he stirred it vigorously until it became a glossy white, holding the spatula like a delicate instrument and studying the paint as it laced off the blade back into the bucket. Kimbrough frowned. Damn those laboratory blubberheads to hell. There's got to be dope put in every single son of a bitchin' bucket. And that's what you're going to do. And it's got to be put in it so it can be trucked out of here before 11:30. He handed me a white enamel graduate and what looked like a battery hydrometer. The idea is to open each bucket and put in 10 drops of this stuff, he said. Then you stir it until it disappears. After it's mixed, you take this brush and paint it on a sample of one of these. He produced a number of small rectangular boards and a small brush from his jacket pocket. You understand? Yes, sir. But when I looked into the white graduate, I hesitated. The liquid inside was dead black. Was he trying to kid me? What's wrong? I don't know, sir. I mean, well, I don't want to start by asking a lot of stupid questions, but do you know what's in this? His eyes snapped. You damn right I know, he said. You just do what you're told. I just wanted to make sure, I said. Look, he said, drawing in his breath with an exaggerated show of patience. Take the dropper and fill it full. Go on, do it. I filled it. Now measure 10 drops into the paint. There, that's it. Not too goddamn fast. Now, you want no more than 10 and no less. Slowly, I measured the glistening black drops, seeing them settle upon the surface and become blacker still, spreading suddenly out to the edges. That's it. That's all you have to do, he said. Never mind how it looks. That's my word. You just do what you're told and don't try to think about it. When you've done 5 or 6 buckets, come back and see if the samples are dry. And hurry, we've got to get this batch back off to Washington by 11:30. He leaves and then comes back. How's it coming? He said, standing with his hands on his hips. All right, sir. Let's see, he said, selecting a sample and running his thumb across the bottom. That's it, as white as George Washington's Sunday go-to-meeting wig, and as sound as the almighty dollar. That's paint, he said proudly. That's paint that'll just about cover anything. He looked as though I had expressed doubt, and I hurried to say, it's certainly white, all right. There's a lot of comedy in this, right? It's a tragic story, but just comedy at the same time. White, it's the purest white that can be found. Nobody makes a paint any whiter. This batch right here is heading for a national monument. So this last piece we're going to perform is called Liberty Paints, based on the factory where the Invisible Man is working. And it's a kind of a traditional blues form, designed to sound almost like a jingle, because that's what we're, the whole chapter is about selling something, right? Selling this idea of America. And so we kind of tried to write it in a jingle sort of way. And then I took a melody from Dvorak's New World Symphony, which Dvorak actually took spirituals and kind of made them his own. So I'm kind of reframing those again and putting them into like a bright saccharine kind of melody. So the original melody is in a minor key, goes like this. Minor key, G minor. I take it and put it into the relative major, just a brighter version of that. So I go. So same kind of concept as far as it's a little bit of the same melodic language, and it's a bouncy kind of tune. And we always talk about how a friend of ours heard it, and there's a part where we go into a waltz melody, and she said, "Oh, it sounds like drops of paint being splattered," and I didn't even think of that, but she observed that that sort of feel as during one section of the tune. So we're going to do Liberty Paints. I can find my music.
Roger, let me start crazy.
Oh yeah. So do you want to talk about that real quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of this song, because this is all Roger's creation, and these are his compositions, but we also work as a band collaboratively. It's a democracy, a musical democracy. And so as we've played this suite over and over and over again, it's evolved in different ways. And one of the ways started to hear something that the drums could start off with. And what I'm going to start off with is something that just plays on the snare drum. And it's called Crazy Army. It is a snare drum piece that is famous among drummers, and it's been in the drum repertoire for about 100 years. And it was initially heard by some drummers in Halifax who were listening on shortwave radio to Scottish drummers, and it was fading in and out, and it seemed to, that whole idea of how the song came to be written down, I thought also fit the nature of this piece of music and the novel, this kind of fading in and fading out, and somebody hearing it in a different way. And also, the snare drum then will give way to the whole band coming in, and me playing the whole drum set. And the drum set also is a combination of as Roger was saying about the trumpet, taking this series of military instruments and turning them into a lyrical sound and a jazz sound. And we just recently had Mardi Gras. There's a feel to this song that I'm playing that is very much reminiscent of second line New Orleans beat, but made in our own Arch Stanton kind of a way. And that really is kind of taking the military marching snare drum and turning it into a drum set playing along with a jazz band. So Crazy Army, and then Liberty Paints.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We're always a democracy. We're still talking. We're still.
Ellison talks a lot about democracy. He
Yeah.
believes that
Democracy
it's
is a slow and.
well, he described a jazz band as being the ideal of democracy. Right?
Absolutely,
Everyone
yeah.
says their piece, but then reinforces the whole.
And within
Right.
the bounds of the tune, which is the Constitution.
And norms and all that kind of stuff, which
Yeah.
we don't need to get political.
No.
Yeah. Norms and forms.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of time for one more. So that was the suite, but Terry is also a composer, so we want to just quickly play one of Terry's songs. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The boss says yes.
All right. I was like, Encore? Yes.
Noname, along for the ride.
Listen to Noname.
Noname's always good.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think it fits with us.
Okay. Of course, I left my.
I'll tell you, we're going to play
Talk about the
a
tune.
tune of mine called Noname. A very profound title. If you saw it written out, it looks like no name with an accent. It's because that's what it is. Dizzy Gillespie had already used Emanon, which is no name backwards as a tune title, so I couldn't use that. So this is called Noname.
I realized I only had my music for the suite.
One, two, three.
trumpet. Ketterer on drums. Mr. Macchia on the electric bass that really enjoyed doing tonight. I'm Roger Noyes with Arch Stanton Quartet.